on to block number 4 of our series, and that's the rail fence. It's a lot of these blocks are called by different things. Most commonly, especially in the South, it's called the rail fence. A lot of times too, it's done in 3s, but because we're working large, 4 seemed more appropriate. You can do it in as many strips as you like. Just make them smaller or larger, however you want to do it. But there are all kinds of variations to any of these that we're going to do. Now again, this one does have a template. You can go through and you can cut out each and every one, and you can put it together. So you'll just sew this one to that one to that one to that one, and then the same thing over here, and then the same thing over here, and then the same thing over here, and then you will just put the 4 blocks together that way. So you'll actually sew this one and then that one and then those. I'm going to show you an easier way though, and that's the main way that I'm going to show, because you probably won't do any other way once you see it. And this is also one of those where using the pre-cut jelly rolls, or whatever you want to call them, comes in really handy, because you get the 2-inch ones and then you just strip them together. And this is the leftovers from the one that I did there. And so we're just going to sew them all the way down in strips. And jelly rolls are the length of the fabric from, or well, the width of the fabric from selvage to selvage. And so usually they're about 45 inches. Now, there are differences in manufacturing that will make them just a little bit off, so these don't always line up perfectly, but they don't have to, because you can just trim that off and start with a straight line there and work your way this way. And so what we'll do is, I've chosen my 4, and I'm going to make a blue one this time. I've chosen my 4, and I want to do it more like a gradient. You'll notice that these are all similar colors, but they're not technically in a gradient. You can do it however you like. I'm going to do mine in a slight gradient here of these blues in different prints, and I'm just going to sew them together. So it's going to look like this when we're done on the back. So you just sew them down, and then all you do is, I need the length to be 6.5 inches, and so I'm going to use my ruler, and I'm going to go to 6.5 inches. And I'm going to line this up, and generally what I want to do is line it up to this one here. I want to use this as my baseline to make sure that I'm as even as possible, because sometimes these are not going to really square up perfectly, but as long as I've got this center line straight, I can square up the rest of it a little bit better. And so I'm going to go to 6.5, and then I'm just going to act like this is a whole piece of fabric in and of itself. And now I have my square that I'm going to work with. And so you can do that however you like. And since these are leftovers, what I'm going to do is I'm going to keep using them. I'll just set on the side because they're already sewn together and everything, so I'll just go ahead, and that just gives me 2 squares. And probably the next time what I'll do is I'll line these up, and then I'll do a different color over here and make a completely different block out of my leftovers. And so I'll set these to the side, and then we're going to get to stripping these together, and then I'll show you how to cut it again and put them together. So this should be fairly basic to you by now. I'm going to take my first 2, I'm going to face them together. Now it does matter which edge I sew, because I need to make sure that it's going to be the one where the next piece is ready to touch. So I want that there, and I want to do this edge so that when I fold this up, I can just add that one there. And working at a long length, you do sometimes have problems keeping it straight. So just go slow and stay steady and go all the way through it. Now I'll speed this up since you know how to sew a seam by now. So when I line this up, I'm gonna actually use this edge to line up onto my mat to be able to straighten up my first cut, because this is the first one that I put down and this one is a freshly cut, so it should be flat, it should be straight. And so as long as I've got that aligned to my mat and it looks straight to me, then I can use my other mat lines to do my cross cut. And I don't want to cut off a whole lot because I want to be able to use as much as I can. So now I'm going to go to 6.5, line it up to my center line. Oh, that one's way off. So let me move a little further down. Line it up there. You'll notice it's usually at the ends that your center line gets off. And I'm also going to use these here to kind of guide on there as much as I can. Make it straight as possible. Alright. So I will lose a little bit more than I really wanted to on there, but that's okay. Now I'll turn it. Oh, why did I turn it again? I shouldn't have turned it again. I should have just gone to 6.5. And I'm going to use this line and my center line to kind of make my square. Still not cutting through that one. There we go. And now 6.5. And you always want to make sure that you're double checking that you're at the right number. 6.5. Go ahead and finish cutting up this strip since I can use it in my other piece maybe. See, this one got really off, but I can probably fudge it a little bit. So I'll go ahead and cut it. And then set these aside for my extra. Goes in the trash. Okay, so now I'm going to orient it like this. It should be more square than that. I don't know what I did wrong. But I'll square it up. It's okay. So with this pattern, no matter where you go, you're going to run into these seams that can easily flip towards you. So I like to put those up top so I can see how that's going as I go, and I can control it a little bit better. So on the back side, these were already going this way toward me, so they were easily just going to slide up under the feed dogs and probably not get turned over. But these were going against the presser foot, and so those could easily be flipped the wrong way. And so I wanted to keep them oriented the way I had them, and so that way having them on the top gave me the control. So let's see what I did wrong. Okay, so I've got my lines going the way that they should, and I've got my point in the center, but let's see how much off I actually am. Because I bet it was in the cutting of my initial strips. I probably cut it wrong. But it went together fine. The edges are just really ugly. So again, this is one of those that you just feel that you could never ever live with that. You can throw it away, but I don't want to do that. So I'm going to see how much of a square I can get. So this is 5.5 inches, and that's where I got off. I should have, I don't know how I cut it wrong, but I cut them so that my 1/4 inches added up to my seams added up to losing a full inch. And so now I have to go with a 5.5 inch square. So I'm going to find my 5.5 inch point right there, and I'm going to line that up to the point in the center, and then I'll square it up, and I'll just have another one of those odd blocks that I can use for a pillow or something else. And I will do this again, and this next time I'll be more careful about cutting my strips down, and that way I will have one that I know actually lines up like it's supposed to. Because if all of your blocks in your quilt are going to be 12.5 inches, you can't throw an 11.5 inch there and, oh, that was way off. Can't throw an 11.5 inch in there and think it's going to actually work out. Because you need that extra 1/2 inch, so they're all 12.5 when they're done being blocks, but when you sew them together, that 1/2 inch gets used up by the seam allowance, and so the finished product is actually 12 inches. And so this is going to be too small, but it looks pretty now. But now I've got to recut my strips, being extra more careful. I don't know how I measured it wrong, but I'll be more careful and make sure that they are actually the width that they need to be, so that it actually gets to be a 6.5 inch square, because that's what it was supposed to come out as. So now that's off, but it's okay. Let's talk a minute about our feet that we are using on our presser feet that we can change out. This one is a 1/4 inch piecing foot that has this little bitty tab right there that you can line your pieces up to make sure that you're doing a 1/4 inch. Now, you will remember that I had all of my numbers wrong on my rail fence. That's because with my machine, this actually requires me to move the needle, and I forgot to. So all of my seams were a little fat. They're a little bit over a 1/4 inch because I didn't scoot my needle over. So pay attention to how your machine is set. Pay attention to what your specialty feet require, because sometimes you have to move the needle position. If you have an older machine, generally that's not going to be an issue. The feet that will be made for that, which you may not be able to find a 1/4 inch piecing foot, but you can definitely find a foot that has a 1/4 inch edge to it, and so you can run across there. If nothing else, like this one is a European, it's a Swedish manufacturer, and so everything's in metrics, and so that doesn't really help for most everything that we're going to be doing, because we still use empirical. And so what you might have to do, because my plate here just shows me metrics, and sometimes, especially American manufacturers will have all of these in inches and, well, quarters, or halves, things like that, parts of an inch. Since these are in metrics, I'm going to need to actually put a piece of tape on here, which doesn't hurt the machine at all, especially if you use painter's tape. I'll put a piece of painter's tape here to mark my 1/4 inch mark, and then I can use that as my guide. So just know that even if you are doing your pattern just like you're supposed to, you're following your method properly, if you have the settings wrong on your machine, it's all going to be wrong. And so the method and everything that I was showing you was perfectly fine. I was just being a total bonehead and didn't set my machine properly. So that threw all of my measurements off, and so that was my issue. So learn from my mistakes, and remember that there are little bitty things that can make a huge difference, especially when you're doing that many seams on something, because just a little bit over 1/4 inch will make it to a big difference whenever you're doing 4 different seams. So be careful, watch your settings, watch the little fiddly things like, did you scoot your needle over on your presser feet? So, okay, again, if you have questions, my email is laura@salinecountylibrary.org.